Hi everyone, thank you so much for listening in on this short webinar to learn a little bit more about effective ways to negotiate an advertising budget for your research site. My name is Kelsey Cushman and I am the Director of Patient Recruitment Services at PatientWise. And we are a full-service patient recruiting and marketing agency for clinical trials. So we work with small research sites on their study-specific advertising as well as their corporate marketing efforts. And we also work with sponsors and CROs on their centralized campaign efforts. So we work, on both sides of the spectrum with large centralized campaigns as well as with really small, just one-off localized campaigns for research sites. So we have a lot of experience negotiating advertising budgets for research sites. I just want to go through a very short webinar to kind of give you some tips as to what has worked best for us in the past when trying to negotiate an advertising budget with the sponsor. It is so amazing to me how many sites out there don't know that they have the ability to negotiate an advertising budget with the sponsor. And it could be various reasons. It could be because they're a site that, they've never advertised in the past. They might not have the resources or the time, so it's just not really a possibility for them. But in my opinion, advertising is so important to really maximize your patient enrollment, and there are so many different options with advertising. You have print ads, radio ads, TV ads, and now with digital ads, Facebook, banner ads online, you'll always be able to find some route to take with whatever indication you're working on, whatever patient population you're trying to get in your door. And there will always be times when the sponsor will already include an advertising budget up front, which is awesome, and you should definitely use it. But there will also be times when it's not included up front. And in that case, you should definitely negotiate one. And I'll just walk you through some steps that I take when I'm interacting with the sponsor to try and get a budget approved for a site. So first things first, make sure to ask your sponsor contact if gaining an advertising budget is even a possibility. There will be those times that it's not for various reasons. For example, let's say it's a very specific study. The sponsor has handpicked very specific sites and they know that those patients are in your database. So in that case, advertising wouldn't be necessary. So they're not going to give a budget. And that's just one example I can think of off the top of my head. But just asking the question, that way you know up front, and you won't go through all the work of putting together a proposal, only to find out that they're not even allowing advertising funds at all for any site. And keep in mind that the way that you position your email or even over the phone is very important. A casual, hey, can we get some advertising funds, isn't going to go over as well as something along the lines of, we are very interested in gaining advertising funds from the sponsor. We really want to get to our goal enrollment target as quickly as possible. Is this a possibility for our site? The way you pose yourself is really going to affect the way the sponsor sees your site, and you'll have a greater chance of gaining those funds from the sponsor. So once your sponsor contact has told you that it is possible to receive advertising funds, your next step is to ask them exactly what they need from you in order to request those funds. This could also save you a ton of time, as sometimes the sponsor, they literally just want to see interest from sites and they want to know how much money they feel that they need to advertise, and then they'll grant the funds, which is awesome. I would say that's a rare case. More often than not, they will require a detailed proposal from you, and they'll want to know, exactly what you'll be doing with the funds, what vendors you'll be using, if any, what the potential population reach numbers will be for, the specific media types that you'll be using. And coming up with a proposal, it does take a bit of time and effort on your end, but it's definitely worth it. In this case, you will need to do some market research to determine what media types will be the best for your indication and patient population as well, and reaching out to different vendors to gain rates to see what will get you the most bang for your buck. That's also something that's important. You want to kind of compare and contrast. But you also want to keep in mind that you want to have good reach numbers. If one vendor, might be less expensive than another, but their reach numbers for this patient population are so much greater, well then it's probably a good idea to go with them versus the cheaper route. So just a few things to keep in mind as far as that goes. And another tip I have in regards to creating proposals is to put them in their own Word document versus just replying to an email. You'll pose your site as much more polished and professional, and you'll show the sponsor that you're really taking your enrollment goal seriously if you take the extra time and effort to put this proposal in its own document. So once you've used your advertising funds up, that does not mean that advertising is over for your site necessarily. Every time one of our campaigns ends for a site, we always go back to the sponsor to request additional funds for that site. And although they aren't granted every time, I would say probably about 75% of the time they are. And this process, it's almost exactly the same as when you ask for advertising funds up front from the sponsor. You just have to word it a bit differently and state that you've already used up your original funds and you're interested in running another campaign, again, to try and get to that enrollment goal as quickly as possible. If the last campaign you ran went really well, it's probably a good idea to run a very similar campaign for a second time around to have similar success. And even if the first campaign didn't go very well, that doesn't mean that the sponsor won't grant additional funds to you. A lot of times they will because they want you to do something different. So if you had, an unsuccessful first advertising campaign, request funds for a different media type. And a lot of times sponsors are very open to that. I always tell sites, the worst the sponsor can say is no. So you might as well give it a try and ask. And yeah, the worst they can say is no to you. So this pretty much wraps up my mini presentation for you all. Keep in mind that everything that I've described here are things that PatientWise does for all the sites that we work with. So if you're one of those sites that is very interested in advertising but simply doesn't have the time or the resources, we can help. We can help you. And I'd be happy to have a phone conversation with anybody who just, even if you just want tips, we're here to help. So thank you all again for taking the time to listen in. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments after listening. And I really hope that you learned a thing or two today about advertising budgets.